I'm pleased to welcome Winnie Cunningham to talk to us tonight about
Hi.
coded bias in technology. Winnie is living in Toronto, and well, I'll let her explain her story because I think it's kind of neat. And I did send out that clip to quite a few folks. But interesting fact, she currently attends the church where Alana is working. So that's a
Yeah.
little local tidbit for us all. But I'm going to pass it over to Winnie.
Okay. Thank you, Annika. So yes, my name is Winnie Cunningham, and welcome to the seminar. Uh, so what happened was my church became very involved in anti-racism seminars and conversations and book clubs, as I'm sure your church has been involved in. And I did notice that nowhere was coded bias mentioned. So I thought that this was an opportunity to create a seminar about technologies uh, and the social justice issues that are being encoded in these technologies. So it's so I applied for a grant, got the grant, I developed the seminar, and I've taken it on the road. This is one of the last few seminars that I'll be doing before I wrap it up. And who knows, maybe in the future I'll do a completely different seminar on different topics. So first of all, I would like to thank the UCC for allowing me to develop this seminar through an Embracing the Spirit grant towards innovative ministry. And I would like to open with a fun clip from Boston, a company called Boston Robotics. So this video has not actually been doctored or animated in any way. It's just a pure video of robots. And we currently have robots that can actually do this. So let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, go back and watch TV, please. So what is the future of the church? And in the future, what will the hotspots for social justice be? So we know technology has played a role in placing the environment in God's creation in mortal peril. But could technology also help us save the world? So first, let's start with some introductory concepts. So what is disruptive technology? This concept was created by Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen. And disruptive technology sweeps away what we know as the standard. So a classic example is the printing press. And there's so many other examples. We can all think of something. It's what iPhone did to BlackBerry. It's what Netflix did to Blockbuster. And the internet could be considered the biggest disruptor. But vaccines or the birth control pill could also be considered the biggest disruptive technology. There's a cartoon that says the little boy's saying to the principal, you know, in the tech world, being disruptive is seen as a positive. So the next concept is, what is artificial intelligence? And it's defined as the ability of a computer to perform tasks commonly associated with intelligent beings. And it's the quest to automate what humans do. So it involves decision-making and learning. And the goal is to have artificial intelligence that can think for itself and kind of become a black box, like you don't know how it arrived at its decision. So this is a cartoon, and the boss is saying his decisions aren't any better than yours, but they're way faster. So the last thing I should define, especially where coded bias is concerned, is facial recognition technology. It analyzes images for biometric data or your face print based on characteristics like the distance between your eyes and your nose. And it's used mainly for identification and verification. It's trying to match your face to something, usually a driver's license photo database. And it is being used right now to unlock smartphones. And here's a cartoon where the facial recognition technology is saying, hey, it's been a while. So in this seminar, it's a very wide-ranging seminar, and there's a number of topics, the common theme of which is technology, that I'd like to touch on. The first is technology's impact on social justice issues and environmental issues. I'd also like to cover future trends such as urbanization and the others listed here, and also offer some hope for the future. So first, I'd like to show you a timeline of the future up until 2050 and kind of map out the way that the world is predicted to head. So it's not all dire, but it is a bit of a mixed bag. And as you will see, technology will become ever more pervasive and immersive, and the environment, unfortunately, is predicted to become ever more degraded. So I think everybody, unfortunately, can see this one. And this one is an interesting one. The idea here is to put the telescope itself orbiting the Earth. So the telescope does not have to look through our atmosphere. So they're saying in this time frame, this will become operational. And this one is unfortunate, but already well on its way. And personal service robots, which could be big helps to, especially to the elderly, to people with disabilities. And this one, I think it's also very predictable that self-driving cars are going to be the dominant type of car fairly soon. Oh, and we also have the world's first trillionaire, and I would love to know who this is and what industry they come from. So the next 10 years, we have cyborgs happening. And I think this just might be a kind of gradual, like a screen that's in your eyelids. So you just have to close your eyes to check your email, something like that. And I'm quite sure that this will happen in my daughter's lifetime. So the extinction events are well on their way. India starts showing its muscle on the economic stage. More on this later, the fact that the global population will reach 9 billion. And the rise of urbanization. So cities will become more and more important. And again, the same concept as the telescope. So the solar power station is actually orbiting the Earth and just collecting solar power directly with no atmosphere to combat. So we'll move on to the very first phase of the seminar. And as we all know, the United Church of Canada is concerned with social justice. But did we know that racism and sexism are being hard-coded into the software or the algorithms that control so much of our lives? So I would like to bring up the topic of coded bias and to demonstrate how racism is being coded into software. I'd specifically like to explore the topic of facial recognition technology, which is that kind of security camera globe thing that I showed at a couple slides back. So we might already use facial recognition technology to unlock our iPhones. In Shanghai, you could pay for goods at the grocery store with a face scan. So it does have fairly benign applications. But here in North America, the biggest use of facial recognition technology is in security. And unfortunately, the race to monetize facial recognition technology is outpacing the actual abilities of the tool. So it's pretty well documented that facial recognition technology works best with the faces of white men. But if you're a person of color or a woman, your chances of becoming falsely identified become much greater. And meet Robert Borshak, Julian Borshak Williams. So he was arrested at dinner time in front of his house in Detroit and in front of his wife and children. And the Detroit police would not say why he was being arrested. He was held overnight in jail. And the next day, detectives showed him a blurry, grainy security picture of an African-American man. And the African-American man in the security photo was shoplifting $3,800 worth of watches. So the detective said, "Is this you?" And Mr. Williams said, "It's not me. Do you think all Black men look alike?" And of course, what had happened was the facial recognition technology had matched that security photo to his driver's license photo. So 2 weeks later, the case was dismissed at the prosecutor's request. But Mr. Williams had been arrested in front of his wife and children. He'd been forced to provide a mugshot. He's been forced to provide a sample of his DNA and fingerprints, and he'd spent 30 hours in jail. So this example is just one of many. And this technology is being used here in Canada as well as in the UK. So I will now show a video of this technology being used in the UK.
Dodgy, putting my hand in my
Can you
pocket
hear
and
it?
washing. Mate, I'm late for work. Like, obviously,
Yes,
I'm
sir.
washing.
Yes,
All
we're
the
good
things
now.
that I have in my pockets, you see none of them getting stopped. You know what I mean? And I literally worked right there, and I even said it to them, I go, mate, I'm on my way to work. They stopped me, they searched me, took me in the van, searched me again, and then as I left, they searched the van to see if I dropped anything.
Live facial recognition has been used at public events and Notting Hill Carnival, in shopping areas, football matches, and has even been used at a peaceful anti-arms demonstration. With social movements on the rise, live facial recognition cameras could be rolled out at demonstrations to run ID checks on people exercising their most basic right to dissent against authority. This really is urgent. Authoritarianism is on the horizon.
So this facial recognition technology is being used here in downtown Toronto. It is almost certainly, if it's called Cadillac Fairview, and they run malls. So they almost certainly run a mall in Halifax because it's across Canada. And this technology is also in casinos. This is a picture of the Eaton Centre in downtown Toronto, and there's the information kiosk right there. And if you, Rose, no record, no. So if you looked at the mall directory or at the map at the information kiosk, and I was one of the many people who did so, then your face was scanned and stored on a database, and over 5 million faces were scanned. So they definitely have my face, and it was a breach of Canada's privacy laws. So there were no signs or notices near the kiosk that this was being done. And even after the investigation by the Privacy Commissioner, it was never clear whether the Eaton Centre was doing a marketing capture or security checks, or even what they planned to do with their database of 5 million faces. So currently, due to the outcry against coded bias and facial recognition technology, Microsoft and IBM have announced a hold on their facial recognition software for law enforcement, but they're not the big players. And the big players such as Clearview AI have not called a halt. And moreover, facial recognition technology is currently being lauded after it was used to identify Capitol Hill rioters. So here's a cartoon that says, it looks like there's a glitch in our AI recruiting algorithm. And racism is not the only bias being hard-coded into our software and algorithms. So sexism is as well. And one troubling example comes from Amazon HR recruiting software. So Amazon is a high-profile software company that everybody wants to work for, and they get a lot of resumes. So in 2018, they created a machine learning software, and this software was self-teaching, and it could learn from patterns. So the job of the software was to pre-screen resumes and give the hiring manager maybe the top 10 resumes. And unfortunately, what this HR software learned to do was automatically disqualify women from software development jobs. So this happened because of pattern recognition. And over a 10-year period, the majority of resumes for software jobs had come from men. And the HR software taught itself that women's resumes were less preferable. And it penalized resumes with all women college names or labels such as Women's Chess Club. So once this was publicized, Amazon ultimately disbanded this in-house tool. But recruiting softwares are here to stay. And if your resume is sent off to an echoing silence, you may never know exactly why the software rejected it. So this is a picture of Steve Wozniak and his wife, Lisa. And Steve Wozniak founded or co-founded a little company called Apple. And this other example of sexism in software was only brought to light because he tweeted about the issue. So it took a celebrity's gaze to get this issue brought to the surface. And Steve Wozniak tweeted that the Apple Card was giving him a credit limit of 10 times higher than that of his wife, despite the fact that the couple shared all assets. So he wasn't the only one reporting this, but he was the only celebrity reporting it. And eventually a Wall Street regulator did launch an investigation. But in most cases, people simply won't question their credit limits. So this one was concerningly recent. This was April 2021. And it found out that Facebook was withholding certain job ads from women because of their gender. And this was found out through an audit of its ad service conducted by researchers at the University of Southern California. So it showed that Facebook's ad delivery system was showing different job ads to women and men, even though the jobs required the same qualifications. So the researchers advertised for 2 delivery driver jobs, and they were for Domino's and one for Instacart. And the one for Domino's for the pizza delivery, it skewed male, and the one for Instacart, interestingly, skewed female. So they found the same pattern with ads for another pair of jobs. Software engineers, where interestingly, the software company NVIDIA skewed male, and Netflix actually skewed female. So on another troubling note, the US Department of Housing and Urban Development has started a lawsuit against Facebook. And they say the ad delivery systems are excluding audiences for housing ads without the advertiser knowing. And they found that houses for sale were being shown more often to white users, and houses for rent were being shown more to minority users. So many of these softwares are created with good intentions, They're trying to save time. They're trying to create a system that's more objective than human eyes. And it seems that technology could possibly help us become less biased or perpetuate bias. And interestingly, in recent years, a call for kind of a FDA of algorithms or Health Canada has grown just to create some type of regulatory body to hold algorithms accountable. So there are some activist groups forming around these issues, and the clip I showed from the UK, that's Big Brother Watch, and they're very active with the facial recognition technology. And the Algorithmic Justice League is a great one in the US. So I'd like to move on to the second half of the presentation, where I'll cover environmental forecasts, which actually might surprise you, and visions of the future of cities. So I'd like to move on to God's creation, or the environment, and how disruptive technologies can help us manage climate change. So I personally don't think we can avert climate change. The best we can do is mitigate it. And I'm also not going to cover the extent of our environmental crisis. I think we all know where we are in terms of the environment. But I would like to cover some hopeful future scenarios and visions of what's next in terms of both Canada as a country and the future of our cities. So this map showing how climate change will impact agricultural yield does indeed look dire. And it's interesting that Canada, as well as Russia and Scandinavia, are positioned to become food production leaders as global warming intensifies. So by 2050, the world's population will approach 9 billion. And I think I mentioned that in the timeline slide. So to support a population of that size, the world will need 50% more food than it did at the beginning of the century. As permafrost thaws in the Arctic, large stretches of land will become arable. It's my hope that not all land needs to be converted to farms, that we can rewild some areas. But I do show this slide to demonstrate that the northern countries, and including Canada, are well positioned for the future. In terms of water, the big picture is clear enough. Canada has a lot of fresh water, an increasingly valuable resource. So I'm just including this slide to show that Canada actually does have a lot going for it in terms of positioning for the future. And climate refugees, if not already, will become an issue. I think you could also call them economic refugees. And I wanted to include this to really underline that the decisions we make now will definitely affect the future. So because of the domestic food and water security of Canada, Russia, Scandinavia, and Greenland, there will be an increasing flow of climate refugees entering from all these countries to share in the abundance and wealth of the North. So just in April 2021, many news sources, including CNN, were talking about a major Russian military buildup in the Arctic. And the US is also in there, in Greenland and in Norway. And I really don't think it's about protecting the Northwest Passage anymore. It's all the countries to the north may face military threats as the northern lands benefit from global warming and become more desirable. So these are the main takeaways from the environmental section of the seminar. And of all of these points, I think that the most important one for me is just that the refugee policies we put in place now will be vitally important in the future. I think it's already beginning to start. So now we come to a topic very close to my heart, and the future potential of cities is often being discussed and explored these days. So the trend for cities is twofold. Some will decay and become largely abandoned, and others will evolve along a trend of self-sufficiently, becoming in effect city-states. So you'll have self-sufficient cities generating their own water, hydro, and food production, and not just in the cities. So water and hydro production, as well as farms, can be incorporated into the design of a skyscraper. And densification, as we all know, will become the norm. So the world is becoming increasingly urbanized. And since 2007, more than half the world's population has been living in cities. So as we saw in the previous timeline slide, the UN predicts that this will happen. 9 billion will be hit by 2050. And again, according to the UN, cities and metropolitan areas are powerhouses of economic growth. And one good thing about cities is that they're already very energy efficient per person because of densification, smaller dwelling sizes, and people walking or using transport. So here's a cartoon, and the car says, "Does your car have any idea why my car pulled it over?" So now I'd like to show you a video from Mercedes-Benz about the future of transportation and cars. And it also has a very interesting and fun backdrop of a future city. So here we go.
Please go ahead. Thank you.
Oops. Oh, sorry. Can't find my cursor. Okay. So this is a picture of Bosco Verticale in Italy. And in this design of these skyscrapers, they've chosen natural trees to plant, and there's self-watering irrigation systems. So this is a very good example of what we could do in future cities. And apparently birds and small animals have been living and moving in to the balconies in this particular showpiece skyscraper. So future cities will feature many 3D printers to create replacement parts. The energy will come from many sources, such as wind turbines found on the tops of skyscrapers, and solar power can be collected just by the window panes or even from the paint. So I find that a very exciting idea, photovoltaic paint that can collect power. There'll be no more hydro poles or cables because it will all be wireless electricity transfer. And gray water or used water recycling is much more efficient than it is today. So by 2050, hopeful predictions give our skyscrapers multiple floors dedicated to vertical farming. And here you can see you have the traditional stacked approach, or you could have the wall farming. I've seen berries grown, and potatoes would be easy. And the downside would be the hydro bills. So the energy consumption will be addressed in the video clip coming up. But if there's any takeaway from this presentation, it is vertical farming. So I know there are churches with unused or underused space, and I'm going to put it out there. Why not do this? Why not do the vertical farming? So to save on hydro, you could use LED lights, and you could monetize it or serve up fresh veg for your out of the cold dinners. So definitely a challenge that I wanted to throw out there. So here is the final video clip, and it is about vertical farming.
Let's take a look inside. Hello.
Hi. How are you?
Good. Well, so this is your farm.
This is my farm.
How many things are you growing in here?
We have arugula, radicchio, minutina, pak choy, kale, lettuces.
When you think about farming in the middle of a city, you've really got to think about resources in a very different way, right? The first resource you think about is space. So this farm is built inside a 320 square foot shipping container, but on an annual yield basis, you're able to get as much food as you would do from a 1 or a 2 acre outdoor farm. It's kind of crazy how much food you can grow in a very tiny footprint.
They also control the climate, so they can grow anything all year round.
Yeah, this is some of the new stuff I've seeded, which is pretty cool. In the middle, I have a lettuce mix, 6 different varieties. This climate allows me to grow multiple things, and I personally am just really excited to try a bunch of stuff. I have some strawberries and poppies at the front of the farm that are really cool. They're pretty adorable. They're just the leaves right now. I get really excited about it, but you know.
The next resource that you really think about is water usage. So in these systems, water drips down through the irrigation system. It's mixed with the right level of nutrients. Gravity does its thing and feeds the plant. And then the water is all captured in a tray at the bottom and is then recirculated. In fact, this whole farm runs on about 8 gallons of water a day, which is like less than your shower.
And that's 95% less water than an outdoor farm would use.
It's like you have an entire forest in here. I love it.
These look good.
This is like the first time in a while that I've been craving a salad.
It's got a little bit of like a zing at the end.
Yeah, good. Okay, cheers.
The other resource that we think about is electricity, right, and energy. So you'll notice these pink lights all over the farm. The reason for that is that actually the spectrum of light that the plant uses is the red and the blue spectrum. It doesn't need all of the other colors, right? And so what we do is we only push in the frequency of light that the plant needs to grow.
Despite this, energy use overall is still a problem. In fact, 50% of Square Root's costs go to electricity. This is an issue many indoor farms have run into, and some have had to close because of it.
All of these projects are important, but in order to do it, they need to heat, they need to have lights, and so there's so much energy costs to grow locally. So a small scale one is never going to be able to be sustainable economically.
And so is this the most energy efficient that it could be, or is there kind of room for improvement?
Oh, there's so much room for improvement. We are at the very, very early beginning stages of this whole industry, right? I would love to figure out how we put solar on the roof of the farms, right? So we can take these farms completely off the grid. So literally every day, we're thinking about ways to make this more sustainable and more cost effective, quite frankly.
So what is the solution in a
So here's a cute cartoon, and the farmer is saying, working in a vertical farm is fine, as long as you keep your head down. So here are the takeaways, and I guess what's important to me here, or exciting, is the fact that skyscrapers can become self-sufficient with hydro production, and water and food production. And all of these organizations are very future aware. So, can you turn the light back on, sweetie? So what I think is that the church can take a leadership position in future-proofing refugee policy, greening the urbanization wave, refusing coded bias, that's a huge one, and of course, reducing the carbon footprint of new technologies. So to close, I wanted to leave you with an idea that I thought was beautiful. As flooding becomes an increasing problem in the lower level cities, one beautiful solution is the idea to just go with it and model many cities along the lines of Venice with waterways instead of highways. Well, this could be something that New Orleans does. And can you imagine that? Kind of a hybrid between Venice and New Orleans. So just to close, I would like to ask if we'll just perpetuate the current cultural biases by hard coding them into our software and algorithms. And many people watch this seminar and they say, we can't solve the problems we have now by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. They say that this is an ideas problem and not a technology problem. And I do think that they're right. I think that technology is the servant. So could we take advantage of technology's promise to add greater objectivity? And could technology also help us manage climate creation? So as somebody who loves technology and works in technology, I truly hope that the answer is yes. And there's an even deeper question. So how will we, as people of faith, use these technologies to love one another? And how does God call us as the church to go forward with love into the future? So that is the end of my seminar. And I was wondering, do you have a mall in Halifax where the, like in Toronto and like in BC, where the information kiosks were taking photos, scanning people's faces without their permission? Have you heard of that happening in Halifax?
I haven't heard of that happening, but the information kiosk doesn't look terribly different, at least the last time I was at Micmac Mall, than the one at the Eden Center. So it's quite possible.
Okay. Yeah, and in Vancouver, there was a Stanley Cup riot, and they were using facial recognition technology at that point as well. So yeah, it's always interesting what is said after the seminar. And just that point that our problems are not technology problems, and that our problems are problems of how we think about the world, perhaps in too much of a capitalistic way. This has been something that a lot of people have been saying. So it's been something that's on my mind. What does everybody think about that?
I'm definitely in agreement with that. I think the ever moving technology is something that we should be embracing and finding the ways to make it work to our advantage and not our disadvantage.
Yeah.
Technology reflects the people who made it, right? It's the same as money. And money in itself is not a bad thing. It's just how you use it that determines if it's good or bad. Same for power. It's how you use the power that makes it right or wrong. Technology, the same thing. It just reflects the society that where it originated. So you can be in favor or against it. It's not a value thing. It's how you use it. But what you were saying about the water cities or countries that are embracing the fact that those sea levels are going up. I grew up in Holland. At least 30% of Holland will be flooded within the next 15 years, 15 to 20 years. So there's already significant. Now I moved there. I moved away from there a long time ago, and not for that reason, but but I'm hearing, of course, about plans and suggestions and visions of how to deal with that reality, the new reality that they have to deal with the fact that 30 to 40% of the nation will be underwater, and we're talking about approximately 9 million people who will be displaced. They don't see an option. They are designing floating cities. They're designing canal systems. They're thinking about huge walls and pump systems to buy more time. It is right now. There's not a solution for it. They don't see. There doesn't seem to be a solution at this point in time. Even when you project into the future, hoping that certain technologies will evolve quickly enough. Right now, there doesn't seem to be an option. I wish I was as hopeful as you were.
That's another criticism of my seminars. It's overly hopeful. And my mother did say that the Canadian Shield does not have enough fertile soil on it to become arable land. So people have pointed that out.
Yeah.
It's interesting that I did create this seminar prior to this summer in British Columbia with the forest fires and the gas station. So I do see clearly how climate change is impacting my family out west right now. And whereas here in Ontario, I feel like we are being, well, we're not experiencing flooding and forest fires like that. So has there been climate change type events out in around Halifax?
I would say so. The way that we experience storms has definitely changed over the last number of years, and I think it's relatable to climate change myself. And then shoreline erosion is always a big thing as well in the Maritimes.
Okay.
Yeah, and about 10% of the waterfront is projected to be submerged within the next 20 years. So there's already contingency plans being made to deal with lost prime real estate and shipping containers and all those things. We know it's going to happen.
Yeah. Well,
I wonder, may I ask you a question in return? I'm just out of curiosity. So most of what you showed, I'm familiar with, and I'm an environmentalist myself. One of the things I'm curious about to hear your perspective is like the indoor, like the vertical indoor farms. How do you see that as doing justice to God's creation? For instance, I see cattle being used as resources rather than as living animals, and they don't get out of the stable anymore. There's these high-tech farms where cows don't get out at all. They don't get to lie on the grass. They don't get fresh water. There's not much animal interaction, but it's very efficient. It's low cost. It's high density, so it's affordable. I don't think it's the right way of dealing with animals that way. And same for growing plants. I have this sense, this gut feeling inside of me that that's not how we're supposed to be dealing with God's creation.
Well, the other side of that is all this arable land that's supposed to be uncovered. Are we really just going to turn it all into farms that are in the natural world? Like, couldn't the vertical farming maybe take a brunt off of just this mindless farming expansion that's happening, and then we could rebuild portions? Oh, wow. So the other thing is, I live in a condo tower in Toronto, and the waiting list for the allotment gardens are just out of control. Like, it's years long. I don't have much hope in hell of buying a house with a backyard in Toronto. So I do have grow lights in the condo. Like, I am doing kind of a very scaled down version of vertical farming. And I'm turning the balcony into a botanical wonderland as much as I can. But this is what I have. And then we have a communal rooftop garden. And this is all I'm going to get, like, there will be no backyard. So it's not the first time I've heard people saying that the vertical farming is too tech heavy and it's divorced from the ground. It's interesting how I live in a condo and I have to embrace these technologies if I want any green within my condo at all. So
I think it's a helpful idea. I mean, that old saying, teach a person to fish and they'll fish for life, rather than give a person to fish and they can only eat for one day, right? And I think that there are unfortunately situations where fresh fruits and vegetables just aren't available to people for financial reasons, but also because it's all a financial reason, because they don't have a yard to grow it in themselves. Like, if you had a yard to grow it in yourself, it is cheaper to buy seeds than it is to buy the vegetables. But yeah, if you don't have a yard to live in, and those are the cheapest places to live, as Winnie's just pointed, like, I think it would be wonderful in a dream world for everyone to have their own little garden plot outside with lots of little creatures running around. I don't know that it's necessarily practical when we're faced with a lot of the obstacles that we're faced with, but vertical gardening does seem like something that we could do. Nobody's really interested in it, so like, nobody should be trying to steal the technology away from people who are trying to do it, right? So I think there's some potential there, because people aren't going to want to monetize that like they are other things. It's not as pretty.
I agree. I agree. I think also what you said, Winnie, about growing your own food in your apartment. I think that's not the same as vertical farms. What you're doing is you experience what it's like to grow stuff, and that gives you you get a kick out of that. I know what it's like. I have two black thumbs, but my spouse has two green thumbs, and it's awesome to eat your own vegetables. But that's I think that's separate from vertical farms that are tech dependent and take a lot of energy, and I don't think it shows a lot of respect for creation in the way how we manipulate the growing process. And so it's not either or. I think it's both and, but it's we need to be careful where we draw the line.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, there was out in Victoria, some lady said that they're coming up with a way to, and it's not vertical farming, it is outdoor farming, but they're stacking the plants in a pyramid shape so that you can leverage a small space and get more plants by using a pyramid shaped structure, which I thought was very interesting. And I Googled that and was like, so maybe in your storefront window, you could do like a kind of a stacked, layered.
Yeah.
Something growing.
The Ecology Action Center, when I spoke with them, actually did recommend to us that we do that kind of stuff in our main windows. Their suggestion was twofold. One was to produce food. Actually, it was threefold. And the second one was to reduce our cooling costs in the summer and our heating costs in the winter because they would act as an extra installation. And then the third was to purify the air inside the building.
Yep.
So we just couldn't go wrong if we did some vertical gardening in our big windows.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Plus, hey, and it adds a little bit of privacy because there's a lot of glass there, and
Yeah.
not everybody feels comfortable being out there on display. Yeah. So four great purposes. I love that.
Yeah.
I'm also very interested in some of the predictions that or forecasts that of course, the further away into the future, the more tentative they are. But one of the forecasts that most futurists never saw coming was the pandemic, and how the drive to live inside a city is suddenly is a lot less significant. Suddenly, especially in Nova Scotia, there's all this so-called almost for Torontonians, cheap real estate being snapped up, and people move to small towns and villages, and sometimes just individual houses in a large field because they can, as long as there's internet. So suddenly the move towards the cities seems to be at least partially reversed, or at least slowed down. So it's interesting to see what else might happen, and will probably will happen to throw a monkey wrench in our beautiful predictions, because every prediction takes an existing situation and extrapolates it into the future. We don't know what will steer it away from
Yeah.
the course.
Yeah, I know they were predicting that self-driving cars would already be here by now, and it's taking a lot longer. And I have the same feeling with all the cyborg stuff. Elon Musk wants to put needles in our brains so we can connect directly to the internet. This is another conversation, but that might take a while too, I think. Yeah. It's Annika, I know you have children, and it's scary to think that this is Rose's generation that will be navigating kind of the cyborg world and all the issues to do with that, and the digital tracking issues and all of that. But, yeah. So
what is your background? What made you develop this presentation?
I've always worked in software, and I've always been interested in the innovation and where software is going. And yeah, when I heard huge conversations going on about racism, and yet zero mention of coded bias, that just opened this whole thing up for me. And then I know there's a lot of worry in the church about the future and about declining attendance and how the future will how the church will be relevant in the future. And the more I do the seminar, the more I think the need in the future for a different way of thinking that is based on love and sharing is vast. Like it's so huge, because right now we're just in the hands of technology companies who want to monetize everything. It's almost like you've met Rose, and it seems like the only thing people think, like the paragon of achievement for Rose, is a Google executive. Like nobody can imagine anything else that's defined as successful. And I'm just shaking my head at that. So anyway, I'm just rambling.
It's okay. It's interesting conversation. Thank you so much for this tonight, Winnie. It's been great and given us a lot of food for thought, especially as we move into our new space with the technology that we'll choose to employ, and vertical gardening possibilities and all that fun stuff. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's great to hear what people have to say, especially about Holland going underwater. That's interesting. I'm going to be looking into that. So I'm glad you reached out after I sent out that newsletter item.
There we go. I stopped the live stream. I don't know if Scott's around or not. He may. Yeah, he's there. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
Can you see how many people join through Facebook Live? Did anybody join?
Yes. I think it was just me. We tend to get more hits like later tonight or tomorrow morning.
Okay.
So yeah, there'll definitely be more hits.
It's
This
too
It's
bad
very
you
interesting. Yeah, no, thank you. It's a lot to take in, but I really appreciate it. I made a whole bunch of notes to think through and all that.
later.
And kind of to Hubert's point too, I guess, the race with the technologies to some extent is inevitable. There's also was that tension about should we be going back to basic, more simple things, but I guess it's just the, how do we sort of govern and restrict or what values we bring to the, sort of the love thy neighbor principles, I guess, to the employee and introduction of all these things, as a church, right? How do we confront and deal with this and try to influence it, I suppose, because again, as Hubert said, there can be good or bad, right? It's just a matter of a lot of the ethical questions we bring to it. So it's very interesting. I really enjoyed your presentation to turn my mind towards these things.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry you didn't get to hear the funky music with the Boston Robotics video, but it's there on YouTube. They're dancing to a tune.
Even without the music, you could almost imagine it. It was so rhythmic. You could tell they were dancing. It was awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, it was lovely meeting you. And yeah, I'm just connecting and showing the seminar to so many vibrant UC communities. That's wonderful.
Great.
you.
I will definitely pop it in our network newsletter for the Anti-Racism Network for the Atlantic provinces. So hopefully that'll get you a couple more requests for presentations, and yeah, we'll see where it goes.